Okay, Deputy
I want to move this motion on behalf of Sinn Féin, Cathaoirleach. I want to also welcome those TDs from the technical group who have co-signed the motion. Now, as we all know, over a year ago, the Government lost a referendum on a constitutional amendment to abolish the Seanad. Its proposal was rejected by the citizens of this state. Now, Sinn Féin would have preferred voters to have had the additional choice of opting for root and branch reform. And we actually proposed to the Government that the Seanad reform be handed over to the Constitutional Convention for discussion and recommendation. But the Government rejected this and allowed only for a yes and no response. In these circumstances, Sinn Féin called clearly for a yes vote to abolish the Seanad. Sinn Féin delegates to the Constitutional Convention, and I was one of those, have also called on the Government and the Oireachtas to empower a second Constitutional Convention with a broader mandate to consider matters relating to the strengthening of constitutional protections of human rights and outstanding political and institutional reform issues, including Seanad reform, northern representation and representation of the diaspora in the Oireachtas. And following the referendum on the Seanad, the Taoiseach and the Government committed in a very clear way to reforming the political system and ensuring that the Seanad, as they put it, was a modern and effective second chamber. However, the Taoiseach has done absolutely nothing to achieve this. And this was most recently and notoriously highlighted by the Taoiseach's direct involvement in the John McNulty affair and Mr McNulty's nomination to the board of IMA. And this illustrates not just the Government's attitude to the Seanad, but also its lack of respect for IMA and its total disregard for the arts and for the arts community. The Seanad in its current form remains elitist, undemocratic and unacceptable as an institution of state. It is not elected by the people. It is elected by a mere 1% of the electorate. It has 60 members. 6 are elected by the graduates of some universities. 43 are elected from 5 panels of nominees, which are supposedly representative of key elements of society, and 11 are nominated by the Taoiseach. Now, any democratic state that would limit the franchise to people who have a third-level degree cannot, in all seriousness, consider itself to be modern, egalitarian or democratic. And there is no such place in a 21st century democracy for such nonsense. Deciding who can vote on the basis of educational attainment is blatant elitism. Sinn Féin believes in one person, one vote and universal franchise, and it's worth noting and passing almost that our group in the Seanad is also denied speaking rights. A properly reformed Seanad, one that is democratic, one that is accountable and egalitarian and works in the best interest of good governance, is urgently needed. Today's Seanad was created by the 1937 Constitution, and in the decades since, with a few honourable exceptions, it has become synonymous with cronyism by Fianna Fáil in particular, but also by Fine Gael and by Labour. It's also been used as a form of a safety net for those who failed to get elected to the Dáil, and there have been incidents where senators were stood down, particularly by Fianna Fáil, just weeks out from a general election, to be replaced by others for just that few weeks. And this brief sojourn secured in the upper house for them entitlements such as lifelong parking in Leinster House. So while the Seanad has opposed the Government on occasions, and some Seanadori have been real pioneers of change and progress and advocacy, at no point has the Seanad acted as a real check on the actions of this or any other government. And since Fine Gael and Labour came into power, this Seanad has supported the Government on almost every occasion. That includes the introduction of the property tax and water charges. Fianna Fáil campaigned for the retention of the Seanad, but in his 14 years in the Fianna Fáil government, neither Micheál Martin or anybody else in that government made any attempt to reform the Seanad. Fine Gael's 5-point plan, I suppose, trying to exploit what it saw as this failure by Fine Gael's 5-point plan, trying to exploit what it perhaps saw as this failure by the other main party, said, political failure lies at the heart of Ireland's economic failure. To fix the economy, we must also fix the political system. This is clearly all rhetoric and no substance. And despite numerous claims over the decades by all the establishment parties that they would reform the Seanad, none of them ever have done so. On 12 separate occasions, reports were produced proposing reform. Not one was ever implemented. In 1979, citizens voted in a referendum to broaden the Seanad's franchise to include graduates of institutions of higher education, and those results now gather dust in a shelf somewhere in government buildings. The fact is that no government has been prepared to allow the second chamber to scrutinise its legislative programme in a meaningful and effective manner. In fact, this government would even allow this chamber to scrutinise its proposals and its programmes. There can be, when we all reflect on it, be no place for an elected institution in which only a tiny minority have the right to vote. Our republic is about citizenship. That includes the right to be treated equally, and it's clearly unjust that the right to vote in this case is determined by your place of education. Sinn Féin proposals for a real and genuine Seanad reform include an engagement with all parties and groups within the Oireachtas, but also broader civic society, to consider how best to reform the Seanad to ensure that it becomes fully inclusive, representative and accountable. The introduction by direct election, by way of universal franchise, of all Irish citizens, the introduction of northern representation and representatives from the diaspora, the introduction of a 50% of Seanad members to be women, and measures to ensure representation of marginalised and minority groups like the travelling community, so that they too have their place in the scheme of things. In short, this motion outlines how the Seanad can be reformed, become more inclusive, to represent all the people of the island of Ireland and not just a small minority. We now have the opportunity to ensure that the Seanad is a place where unjust or regressive legislation can be challenged. We have an opportunity to make the Seanad relevant and for it to have a positive impact on the lives of ordinary people. It's also a chance to include citizens from the North, and that includes people from the Unionist tradition in the political life of the nation and of this state. So I commend this motion to the Dáil.
Thank you very much indeed.